This episode of the Shroom Boom is about medicinal mushrooms. Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm not honestly certified in any way to talk about what to recommend for you. This episode is purely about my experience and what I've discovered over the past 5 years as a white millennial girl studying mushrooms. I need to be outside. Let's go to the forest. Bye, Lou. When it comes to medicinal mushrooms, there is an overwhelmingly large amount of information out there. This number changes all the time, but scientists estimate that we've identified around 5% of the world's fungi. That compares to 95% of plant species. Mushrooms are ethereal. Mushrooms are sneaky and fleeting, and as humans, we just haven't had enough time to actually interact with them in the same way that we have had plants. Majority of the time they live under the ground, and we actually don't even get to see them until they grow into fruiting bodies of mushrooms, which then decompose just about as fast as they grow. But medicinal mushroom research is increasing rapidly. Modern science has rediscovered the power of the fungi kingdom. And while there are hundreds of medicinal mushrooms we could talk about, we're going to focus on just 5. Reishi, Chaga, lion's mane, Cordyceps, and Tremella. There is a laundry list of potential benefits for each of these mushrooms, but the truth is that medicinal mushrooms affect each person differently. And so this episode is really going to be about how I personally use these mushrooms and the studies and the research that really piqued my interest for each of them. First, I want to talk a little bit about the history of medicinal mushrooms in BC. Peer-reviewed research is one thing, but it's important to recognize that Indigenous peoples in BC have a long history of working with fungi. Perennial tree fungi were used for tinder, fire starter, and mask carving. Puffballs were used to stop hemorrhages. Our local natives hold knowledge, much of which was lost through colonization, about how to work with wild native mushroom species. When it comes to mushrooms that the average consumer is looking for right now, reishi, lion's mane, the knowledge of cultivation and use is mostly held in Asian countries like China and Taiwan. And this is because those are the native species to that region. There is one family that we can look to that brought affordable availability of organic medicinal mushrooms to BC from China, and that's the Chilton family. Jeff Chilton started Namex, a B2B medicinal mushroom company, in 1983 after growing mushrooms commercially for 10 years. He traveled to China in 1989 and discovered an incredible depth of mushroom knowledge and production capacity. Jeff's sons have carried the family legacy, with Sky starting Real Mushrooms and his brother Adam working closely alongside him. I do always prefer to consume local, and if you watched episode 2 of the Shroom Boom, you'll understand some of the challenges involved in scaling a mushroom cultivation business. The margins on fresh mushrooms are not that great in BC. Now imagine having to dehydrate and grind something down that's 80% water. There are companies who grow mushrooms in Canada for their supplements, and I greatly respect the businesses that are able to do this. However, aside from choosing a local product, there is nothing wrong with mushrooms from China, as long as they're grown with care, tested for heavy metals and pesticides. And I have to give credit to Tony from FreshCap for putting it this way. Coffee comes from places in the world where you expect to get coffee from. Brazil, Colombia, Indonesia, because they have the infrastructure, climate, and knowledge. But why is this different for mushrooms? First mushroom we're going to talk about is my favorite, reishi. There are multiple varieties of reishi, but most of the research is around Ganoderma lucidum. Reishi is the mother of mushrooms. There's 2 main compounds in reishi that are contributing to their potential benefits: polysaccharides and triterpenoids. There are also other interesting compounds in reishi, phenols, sterols, to name a few, but it's the triterpenes that make for the very bitter taste. So in 2019, I made my first Reishi Kombucha to try to alter that bitterness in the reishi tea, and I brought it to market in 2020. And now I'm going to share all my secrets on exactly how to make it. Fermented medicinal mushroom kombucha. You can make kombucha out of reishi instead of using black or green tea, and it's caffeine-free, adaptogenic, and absolutely delicious. The biggest difference with reishi kombucha compared to regular kombucha is the fermentation time. So a regular kombucha would take between 7 to 10 days to ferment. Reishi kombucha takes 2 days. A lot of people will be at home thinking, how is that possible? I'm hypothesizing that it has something to do with the beta glucans and the yeast fighting with each other and just like going into overdrive. That hypothesis was slightly supported by finding a paper out of Serbia where the researchers made reishi kombucha and tested the acidity levels from day 1 to day 14. And on day 2, they also found that it reached its desired acidity. First of all, you need a large glass vat to ferment in. You need pressure-rated glass bottles. Do not go buy these bottles from the dollar store. You need to get the pressure-rated ones. They will explode, speaking from experience. You need cane sugar. Scale will make your life a lot easier. You need a starter of some sort. So you can buy kombucha scobies online. What I do is I go to the grocery store and I buy a bottle of plain kombucha. If there's any type of like flavorings in it, you don't want to use that. It needs to be just plain. Take that home, pour it into a mason jar and let it sit for 2 weeks and voila, you'll have scobies just growing on their own. $5. Step 1 is extracting the reishi into water. And you'll do this through 4 to 6 hours of a low boil on the stove. If you have a pressure cooker, you can get the same results in about 2 hours of pressure cooking. I like to use a sliced whole reishi. It doesn't allow you to extract the maximum amount out, but I like to use this a few times. You can also use powdered reishi, but what you need to remember is that it's not water soluble. It won't just dissolve. There will definitely be more beneficial compounds if you use powdered reishi, but it's also like really potent. Use between 5 to 10 grams of reishi per liter of water. So yesterday I boiled 80 grams of reishi into 8 liters of water. Math is mathing. Step 2 is adding your sugar. My magic number is 44 grams per liter of sugar. So yesterday I made the tea, I added the sugar while it was hot so it could dissolve, and then I let it cool overnight, and this morning I'm going to add the starter. So step 2 is adding a starter at 20% of the total volume. So you'll give it a good stir. This will then sit for 48 hours, and at the end of that 48 hours, I will take out about 8 ounces of liquid into a separate jar and let that sit so that I can continue having an active culture. Once I've taken out my culture to continue, I will add in my fruit or my flavoring. Blackberry and sage is my favorite. There's also cucumber and mint is one of the best that I've ever made. And you want it to sit in the kombucha for another 12 to maximum 24 hours. After you've flavored the kombucha, you want to pass it through cheesecloth or whatever you have, and then you will bottle it. I do not do a second fermentation in the bottle. I immediately put them in the fridge and let them sit in the fridge for, say, 2 weeks until I'll drink them. Lion's mane is near and dear to my heart because I have a family history of Alzheimer's as well as multiple sclerosis. And so this is one of those mushrooms that I will continue to research forever and ever. And there is a few compounds that we want to be considerate of when it comes to lion's mane, one of them being hericenones and the other being erinacines. There's been a lot of promising preclinical trials when it comes to lion's mane. A lot of the work that's been done has been with dementia or people with degenerative cognition diseases. In one of the most recent randomized placebo-controlled double-blind studies with humans that were healthy adults, the study looked at a single dose of lion's mane as well as 28 days of lion's mane dosage, 1.8 grams per dose. And it looked at a number of different cognition tests, but one being the Shroom test, which is that test where you're looking at a picture of, say, the color blue, but the color of the writing is in red. From a single dose of lion's mane, subjects performed better on the Shroom test, and from 28 days, subjects reported trends toward reduced stress. Now, because we're not far enough along in clinical research, we do need to look at anecdotal stories as kind of a signal of what to look for. When I met Brandi Garden and she told me the story about how lion's mane helped her, I knew that this was worth the time to share it, because it is just one of many, many stories that I've been told that have really shown me that this mushroom is worth our money to research more.
I was an elementary school teacher who had psoriatic arthritis. There was a lot of swelling in my joints, my right hand particularly affected. I was given an opportunity to be in a clinical trial for a pharmaceutical immunosuppressant drug that I was very grateful took away all of the symptoms of my inflammation and even of psoriasis on my skin. I was in that clinical trial for a very short time before I had some side effects, skin cancer to be specific. And at that time, nothing else had worked for me. I had tried pharmaceuticals for years before being in a clinical trial that were either ineffective or had so many side effects that they weren't the one for me. And then I was in this clinical trial with something that finally worked, and I wasn't feeling any side effects. And skin cancer, of course, isn't something you feel. It just showed up, and it was like, I stayed on that drug because I had such great effects. And I got skin cancer a second time. And I stayed on that drug because life was great, and I was playing sports, and I was teaching, and I was living my best life. And I got skin cancer a third time. And the universe started to knock on my door and say, something's going on here. Maybe this isn't for you, but I wasn't ready to give up the lifestyle I was leading. And just a few years ago, so about 6 years ago now, I was still taking this drug, and while driving, I had a seizure. I was seen by a neurologist who gave me an MRI on my brain, and when I saw that scan, I broke up with my rheumatologist. I broke up with really most of Western medicine at that time and decided to heal myself, to look deeper at the root cause of my skin condition, of my arthritis, and stop masking the surface symptoms of what I was seeing and really start to address real me. When I looked into neurogenesis, because what I saw on the MRI of my brain was it looked like an early onset of dementia. And I was a young teacher who loved to learn and had a thirst for knowledge, and I wasn't done. And when I started looking into neurogenesis and natural ways to literally regrow my brain, lion's mane mushroom showed up for me over and over and over again.
Lion's mane, along with other medicinal mushrooms like cordyceps and turkey tail, made such an impact on Brandi's health that she left her teaching job to start Eversio Wellness with her husband, Craig. As someone who went through the BC public school education system, I always had frustrations that I wasn't exposed to the power of fungi until I was in my late 20s. And I was curious to know if the curriculum had changed for school-aged kids to include fungi education.
So the science curriculum, grade 4 and 5, right now, and it changes over time. I remember very clearly the only lesson I can remember ever teaching was fungi as the decomposers, the recyclers of the forest, which was important, but I so remember the children in the class thinking they were gross. Mushrooms are weird, mushrooms are gross. The fact that they're decomposers just makes them part of the garbage system in their mind, and they were really glossed over. So massively underappreciated, undervalued, understudied, and I think that's why they're then underutilized. I think, especially for kids, especially for young kids, they're the researchers, because it means something different to everyone when they come across it. We have more than enough information to teach them how important it is to respect what's happening when we come across fungi. What are they doing here? Just the fact that they make us stop and ask the question, what is that? It looks different than the other things I've seen in my textbooks. It's not a tree, it's not a flower, it's different. I think that's so important, to open our minds to what are they? What are they doing here? And then to take that back and start looking at how they grow and their purpose in the forest. What's the job that they're doing? And then how were they used by our ancestors? Even if we stopped it there, it would be enough.
Next up is chaga. Now, chaga is actually not a mushroom. It is a hardened mass of mycelium and basically wood from a birch tree. Chaga contains beneficial compounds like beta-glucans, sterols, melanin, polyphenols, and terpenoids like betulin and betulinic acid. What really interests me about chaga right now is the melanin content. The water extract of chaga has been shown in studies to be SPF 30. In addition to UV protection, there's research showing anti-aging and anti-inflammatory effects. This caused me to start replacing all of my exfoliants with chaga mushroom powder, as I find the size of the powder to be the perfect face exfoliant that's natural and sustainable to go down the drain. I make small batches using jojoba oil and honey, and I cover my face in it for a few minutes before washing and exfoliating. Next up is Tremella. There's research behind Tremella for skin anti-aging, photoprotection, wound healing. There was a study from 2016 that I remember finding that really made me interested in Tremella. They extracted polysaccharides from Tremella, and they found that it increased collagen production. A lot of people refer to Tremella as the kind of new hyaluronic acid.
Tremella became interesting to us because I feel like it was a bit of the missing link. Reishi, of course, most people, it's the most famous mushroom. It's probably got the most research. It's been in the Materia Medica for thousands of years. We know that, we know what it can do. Lion's mane mushrooms have been popular for a long time, cordyceps. We were working with these mushrooms in the beginning because they were the ones people were asking for. When we got to a point where we were starting to look at what people weren't asking for yet, but what the need was, skin comes up all of the time. And so many people present with skin conditions when the autonomic nervous system is not regulated. It can show up as acne, rosacea, eczema, psoriasis, and I was someone who had dealt with skin issues. So many people in our lives were asking us, what's the mushroom for skin? And when you go looking at that, either chaga or tremella are the ones that show up the most.
Next, I want to talk about a huge fan favorite in medicinal mushrooms, and that's cordyceps. Cordyceps is an entomopathogenic fungi, which means it's parasitic to insects. I know that most people will probably know of this mushroom because of The Last of Us. You can rest easy knowing that this will not infect humans. And I'll say literally no more on that. Now, cordyceps has over 750 strains. There's two that we're actually concerned about when it comes to medicinal benefits. And that doesn't mean that the others don't have medicinal benefits, but we just haven't looked into them yet. Cordyceps militaris and Cordyceps sinensis. Cordyceps sinensis is the type of cordyceps that grows on insects out in the Himalayas, in China, in Nepal. When I went to Nepal, I was so excited to try to find cordyceps in the market there. And I ended up paying, I think it was $20 Canadian for 2 tiny little pieces of cordyceps. And that's when I really realized why Cordyceps militaris is what most companies will use in supplements. What I find really interesting about cordyceps is the cordycepin. Cordycepin is so structurally similar to adenosine, which causes your body to produce ATP. Essentially, it's food for the mitochondria. It's giving your DNA, it's giving your cells energy. Now, when you look into research on cordyceps, there's a significant amount on something called CS4, which is cordyceps mycelium grown in liquid fermentation. Now, why is this all important? This is important because when you're looking at mushroom supplements, the vast majority of them will be Cordyceps militaris because a kilogram of Cordyceps sinensis can be as much as $20,000. And so if the price isn't adding up and Cordyceps sinensis is on the label and it's not CS4, there's something going wrong. There's kind of two camps that I interact with in the mycological community, and that is those that are hell-bent on educating that mycelium on grain is a beneficial product and one that we should be taking. The other camp feels very against mycelium on grain and feels that fruiting body should be the only supplement that we should take. There's a couple things that I want to say about this. If we look at the historical research, the majority of the research is done on the fruiting body of the mushroom, which makes sense because that is the part that we see. Just because we have research on the fruiting body does not mean that we should completely shut out the possibility that mycelium on grain supplements are beneficial. We are in a place where there is so much emerging science, and we are just beginning to understand mushrooms as a kingdom of fungi to other kingdoms that we're more familiar with, say plants, including trees, moss, flowers, romaine lettuce. And then you compare those species to the species within the fungi kingdom. Cordyceps, lion's mane. Some people will say, I don't like mushrooms. And the first thing that I think is that is legitimately the same thing as saying, I don't like plants. And that diversity is why I support whoever is researching the fermentation of substrates using fungi. A substrate is anything that you're inoculating with fungi. It could be an agar plate, straw, rice, barley. And while I have not seen enough research yet, I'm absolutely fascinated by the interesting things that are produced when a fungi transforms a substrate. If we're looking at fungi from less of like food and more as drug discovery, then mycelium becomes really, really, really interesting. Antibiotics like penicillin, but also many others, are produced by fermentation. In the case of creating antibiotics, it isn't the mycelium that we are interested in consuming. It's what the mycelium produces, secondary metabolites, by eating whatever we give it. Secondary metabolites are any chemical compounds produced by fungi growing on anything. In nature, they play a role in competition and self-defense against other living organisms. The most famous secondary metabolite is probably penicillin.
Early in the 1920s, in London, Alexander Fleming, a young bacteriologist, worked in the inoculation department of St. Mary's Hospital. In one of the glass dishes where he cultured germs for his experiments, Fleming noticed one day in 1928 that some mold, such as appears on decaying food, had begun to grow. A spoiled experiment. But with mind alerted by the earlier work on protective substances, he looked closer. He saw that near to the mold, no germs were growing. Might it be that this mold, like the human body, produced a substance capable of destroying germs? He made tests and found that even some of the most dangerous germs died near to the mold. He then grew the mold in a meat broth liquid. The color of the liquid changed finally to a bright yellow. This liquid proved lethal to germs, even when greatly diluted. Not pure enough to be injected into a human body, it was nevertheless effective on wounds. Fleming published what he had done, calling his substance penicillin. Attempts to purify it and to extract its essence failed. In the 1930s, a new chapter opened at the University of Oxford. The professor of pathology, Dr. Howard Florey, was joined by Dr. E.B. Chain. Together, they planned a research project on natural germ-killing substances. They unearthed the now old papers on penicillin. They formed a team. The great quest was on. First, Chain and his colleagues set to work on the chemical problems of extraction and purification. They found a way of transferring the active penicillin from liquid to liquid until it was held within almost pure water. They froze off the water, which left a brown powder. Here was a powerful form of penicillin, still crude, but which produced no ill effects in animals. Florey prepared the great test. The germ Streptococcus is a killer. This he injected into mice. Half of them then received the brown powder. Those who had been given the penicillin lived and were healthy. And Professor Florey declared, "It looks like a miracle."
Outside of drug discovery, we've been fermenting things with fungi to create new things for a very long time. This technique can be traced back almost 8,000 years, initially for beverages and food production like beer and wine. We have fungi to thank for chocolate and bread and soy sauce. Not only is this fungi, but this is fermentation. And I think fermentation is badass. We need to keep an extremely open mind and understand that there is so much more than is on the surface or that we know right now. It's getting cold in this forest, so we're gonna get out of here.